If you're like me, you probably fondly remember the phrase ante up from playing poker as a kid. In today's game, though, antes have seemingly disappeared from the table. There's just these strange things called blinds. What are blinds? Well, it's important you understand them because they actually will affect your optimal poker strategy when you sit down at the table. Let's first talk about the two types of blinds you're most likely to see. A small blind and a big blind. We'll abbreviate them SB and capital B, capital B. The big blind is almost always exactly 2 times the small blind. So if the small blind's $1, big blind will be $2 and so on. Let's look at a couple tables to talk about where the small blind and the big blind are located. These two circles are tables, and that hash mark at 12 o'clock is your seat. In the first example, you'll occupy the dealer button. The small blind and big blind are always seated immediately to the left of the dealer. At a 9-man table, there'll be 6 other unnamed seats. The small blind, let's say, is 1. Big blind will be twice that, 2. And once those are posted, hands are dealt, and then the first person to the left of the big blind will act pre-flop. He's the first to act pre-flop. And then post-flop, the small blind is actually the first to act. If that seems confusing to you, consider this. The small blind actually was the first person to act pre-flop. He was just forced to post his small blind. The big blind was second to act, but again, he was forced to post his big blind. So when we say the person immediately left of the big blind is first to act, we're actually saying he's the first conscious action at the table. So if you want to just remember it more simply, just think that the small blind is always the first to act. It just happens that he's forced to act pre-flop. So if you've got that, let me complicate the whole situation a little bit for you. The dealer button, you might know, doesn't stay stationary. It actually rotates counterclockwise at the end of every hand. So let's look at this second table. Exactly 1 hand later, you're seated in the same seat, but you're no longer the dealer. The dealer button's moved 1 seat clockwise, 1 seat to your left, as has the small blind and the big blind and the 5 remaining seats at the table. It seems like a lot of unnecessary complication to the poker game. So why do we even have blinds? There are a couple good reasons. The first, and by far the most important, is that it encourages action. Blinds encourage action, as do antes. And think about it. Think if we had a game with no antes, no blinds. It was free to see hand after hand after hand. The logical extension of that game would be that everyone would just wait for pocket aces, and you would only ever see a confrontation when 2 people, by the luck of the draw, get dealt pocket aces. And to avoid that dreadfully boring outcome, the casinos and the online poker rooms do a smart thing. They require, on a rotating basis, people to post blinds. And because now every player at the table has the opportunity to win a little bit of money by winning those blinds, action commences. A secondary, but still interesting reason why blinds exist is to anchor 2 things. Blinds anchor bet sizing. In Texas Hold'em, the minimum bet is actually the size of the big blind. Blinds also anchor buy-ins. A buy-in is the size of the stack that you sit down at the poker table with. In most card rooms, the range of buy-ins is limited to a minimum of 50 and a maximum of around 200 big blinds. So at a 1-2 no-limit Hold'em table, a $50 buy or 50 big blind buy-in minimum would be $100, and it would max out around $400. If you're still with me, let's complicate the picture a little bit more. Let's talk about blinds in tournaments. You probably know that blinds increase each successive level of a poker tournament. So on the x-axis, let's draw level. Level 1 is where everybody starts at the beginning of the tournament, and by the final table, it might be at level 100, level 200, depending on how long the tournament lasted. Along the y-axis, we'll draw blinds. And there's usually a pretty smooth, consistent relationship between level and blinds. They rise almost linearly throughout the tournament. So let's say at some early level of the tournament, maybe you started off with 100 big blinds, but you lost some pots, blinds have been rising. At some level, at a given blind, let's say you have 10 times. Your stack size is up here, it's 10 big blinds. The challenge of a tournament is that if you just maintained this stack, which is difficult to do, but if you maintained it, at some point in the future, all of a sudden you're only going to have one big blind, which means you've basically lost already. One big blind, it's almost impossible to come back from that. Because your chances of winning or even just cashing in the tournament dramatically decrease as your stack size in terms of big blinds decreases. It encourages you to be more and more aggressive as your stack size is shrinking. And that's what makes tournaments so fun.